H.L. Mencken once defined Puritanism as the haunting belief that somewhere, somehow, someone might be happy. All right? Now, Mencken was missing his target. When he was saying that about the original Puritans, it's a slander. But there's a type of person in the world of whom that's true. Some of the heirs of the Puritans, some of those who thought that that's what God wanted, began to behave that way, but the original Puritans were not that way at all. You may have heard that the Puritans were the original Scrooges. They were the original Grinches. They were the original bah humbuggers. Well, it is quite true that the Puritans said bah humbug, and it's quite true that they said bah humbug aiming it at Christmas celebrations. That's exactly right. But you have to be careful here. You have to think like adults. We want to be careful not to be guilty of anachronism. An anachronism is something that's out of time, where you take something from one period of time and you read it in the light of another period of time. My best personal illustration of that kind of anachronism is when I was reading the great Church Father Augustine, when I was reading his City of God for the first time. I was having a wonderful time in the book, all sorts of weird, strange, and things I'd never thought of before. It's a great, great book. And I got to the part where Augustine started making fun of the pagan priests. There were pagan priests that were still around in Augustine's time, and Augustine started making fun of the pagan priests. And when he started making fun of them, one of the things he picked out to make fun of was their funny, pointed, mitered hats. Right? So Augustine starts making fun of the funny, pointed, mitered hats. The mitered hats are the hats that look like a fish when you look at them sideways, like an upended fish. And so I thought, that's strange. And so I looked at the cover of my copy of the City of God, and sure enough, there's Augustine in a funny, pointed, mitered hat. Now, in the book, he's making fun of people who dress like that, and on the cover of the book, somebody thought, Augustine was the Bishop of Hippo. Everybody knows what a bishop's hat looks like. Well, that's what a bishop's hat looked like later on, and so they projected it into the wrong century. They projected it in an anachronistic fashion. It's out of place. It's out of time. That's what anachronism is. In order to understand the Puritan opposition to Christmas and Christmas celebrations, you have to understand two things. One of the Scottish commissioners to the Westminster Assembly, his name was George Gillespie. He was a staunch opponent of the church year being used in a fashion that bound the conscience. He was a staunch opponent of using the church year in a way that would bind the conscience. He said this, quote, "The keeping of some festival days is set up instead of the thankful commemoration of God's inestimable benefits." In other words, he was objecting to celebrations that were offered instead of thankful commemoration of God's benefits. Howbeit, he said, the festivity of Christmas has hitherto served more to bacchanalian lasciviousness than to the remembrance of the birth of Christ. So one principal objection that the Puritans had was that Christmas celebrations at that time were debauched. It is anachronistic when you think of sort of a snow-covered Victorian Christmas, and you think that that's the way Christmas was throughout all 2,000 years of church history. That's anachronistic. That's not the way it was. Oftentimes, the celebration of Christmas at the time of the Puritans was simply a drunken brawl. All right? It was like an out-of-control office party in a secular corporation. That's what Christmas celebrations were like. So, in other words, a person might object to pepper spraying fellow shoppers without rejecting the blessing of Thanksgiving. All right? Or one might object to pepper spraying fellow shoppers without objecting to shopping the day after Thanksgiving. Rejecting an abuse is not the same thing as rejecting the thing. He can object to a Mardi Gras orgy without objecting to the celebration of Christ's resurrection. Mardi Gras, of course, is right before the period of Lent, so you're going to give up a bunch of stuff for Lent in some traditions, and Lent leads up to Easter, and right before you give up all that stuff, you go on a drunken debauch. All right, let's have a Babylonian party right before we honor Jesus by all the stuff that we give up. Well, Puritans would object to that, and Puritans would rightly object to that sort of thing.